Good evening. Just hours ago, American satellites detected something unprecedented, an action no nation on Earth has ever attempted. When intelligence analysts examined the imagery, when they processed the thermal signatures, when the initial classified briefing reached the Pentagon, for major American cities were discreetly placed on heightened alert. Not through public announcements, not with alarm systems, but via an emergency protocol reserved exclusively for existential-level threats. Before we continue, if you want to stay informed about developments that could reshape global security, make sure to follow this channel and turn on notifications. What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you understand modern warfare. What Russia just activated, what it deployed for the first time in history, fundamentally transforms how the United States approaches its own national security. And I want you to grasp exactly why. This wasn't a routine missile test. This wasn't a standard naval drill. This wasn't cyber operations or intelligence gathering. What Russia executed for the first time in the modern era placed American officials in a situation they've never encountered, something so unprecedented, so far beyond conventional state behavior that senior military commanders characterized it with a single word: unthinkable. And yet, it occurred. Tonight, I'm going to explain how the United States uncovered it, what drives Russia's strategy, what this signifies for global stability, and why major American population centers from New York to Chicago to Los Angeles were quietly directed to update emergency response procedures for the first time in more than 20 years. Stay with me, because once you comprehend what Russia has done, you'll understand we've crossed into a new phase of great power rivalry. It started with a single irregularity, an energy spike captured by a satellite engineered to monitor nuclear operations. But this spike didn't correspond to the signature of a nuclear facility or a ballistic launch. It was more compact, more focused, more concentrated. Analysts initially suspected a technical error. These fluctuations occur regularly. But a second detection appeared just 8 minutes later, followed by a third 14 minutes after that. 3 identical signals, identical location, identical energy characteristics, identical intervals. That's when analysts understood something was fundamentally wrong, because nothing, no documented Russian system, had ever generated this particular energy pattern. The coordinates indicated not a missile complex, not a naval installation, not a radar station, but rather a restricted Russian compound deep within the Arctic Circle, a location so isolated that even Russia's own satellite surveillance of the area is sparse. When the classified imagery arrived, something within the facility's boundaries was radiating extreme heat, far exceeding anything Russia has ever publicly acknowledged possessing. And when analysts enhanced the images further, they confirmed that Russia had brought online a system that had been speculated about for years but dismissed by many as exaggerated or technically impossible: a mobile long-range strategic platform with capabilities no nation has ever fielded. Not in the Arctic, not on land, not anywhere. This wasn't a missile. This was more problematic. This was a system capable of striking the continental United States faster than any current detection architecture can ensure a countermeasure. That's why 4 American cities were placed on alert. Because if Russia can deploy this system, and U.S. intelligence now assesses it can, the United States has entered an environment where warning time contracts from minutes to mere seconds. Let me clarify what that means. In every major military competition, U.S., Russia, China, the concept of warning time is fundamental. If an adversary launches a strategic weapon, you require sufficient time to detect it, track it, verify it, alert leadership, identify the destination, and formulate a response. Even with hypersonic missiles, even with submarine-launched systems, there remains a window. Narrow but real. This new system obliterates that window, and that's what makes this moment historic. Russia didn't merely test new technology. Russia didn't simply deploy a new weapon. Russia activated something the United States cannot readily neutralize, intercept, or counter. Something no nation has possessed before, and it transforms everything. Now, let's examine why Russia took this action. Because nothing in great power dynamics occurs by chance. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't routine experimentation. This was a deliberate signal. For years, the United States has expanded missile defense infrastructure across Europe and Asia. Installations in Poland, installations in Romania, radar in Norway, integrated defense systems in Japan and South Korea. From Moscow's vantage point, this resembled strategic encirclement, a constricting perimeter of American military capability closing around Russia's frontiers. And when great powers feel trapped, they don't withdraw, they innovate. This new Russian system represents the product of that anxiety. It provides Moscow something it has never possessed, a strategic counterbalance. A method to circumvent U.S. defenses. A capability to strike if the Kremlin concludes, correctly or incorrectly, that the United States is preparing action against it. Fear drives innovation. Fear drives escalation. Fear drives irrational decisions by rational actors. That's why this moment carries such danger, because Moscow didn't activate this system during a period of stability. It activated it during an era of maximum friction. Sanctions, proxy warfare, military expansion, global competition. When states feel threatened, they accept risks they would otherwise avoid. And when those risks involve weapons of unprecedented capability, the world edges closer to catastrophe. Inside the Pentagon, the discovery triggered intensive analysis. Scientists, defense officials, intelligence personnel spent hours examining the thermal signatures, cross-referencing them with existing data, running projections, calculating trajectories. They determined that if Russia launched this system, current American early warning infrastructure might not detect it quickly enough to guarantee an effective counter-response. In plain terms, the United States is more exposed today than it was yesterday. And that's not an easy reality for American officials to accept. For decades, the U.S. depended on its detection advantage. Satellites, radar networks, signals intelligence. It maintained confidence that even if Russia possessed advanced missiles, America would have time to react. This system shatters that confidence. But here's the element most people don't realize. The system Russia activated may not be intended to strike the U.S. directly. It may serve something more subtle and more dangerous, a threat that transcends bluffing. A weapon that may not be meant for actual use, but for strategic pressure. A tool designed to make Washington pause. Because if Russia possesses the capability to bypass American defenses, then every future crisis, from the Arctic to the Middle East to Eastern Europe, changes fundamentally. The United States loses operational flexibility. Russia gains negotiating power. The world becomes less predictable. Great powers don't need to fire weapons to alter history. They only need to make others believe they will. And right now, the United States believes. Now, let's discuss escalation. The moment after the Pentagon verified the activation, the immediate question arose. Is Russia preparing a demonstration, a launch, a test toward international waters? American analysts began real-time monitoring of Russian Arctic operations. Naval activity intensified. Air defense systems came online. Ground personnel relocated to fortified positions. Communication patterns transitioned from standard to encrypted. These are indicators intelligence officers recognize immediately. Russia was not conducting itself like a state performing routine equipment evaluation. Russia was conducting itself like a state preparing for a strategic posture adjustment. Then came the next indicator, an unusual series of transmissions from Russia's Northern Fleet Command. The messages were brief, encrypted, staggered, but they contained a recognizable pattern, a pattern matching the precise communication sequence Russia employs when elevating its nuclear readiness. This triggered the internal American alert. This prompted quiet notifications to 4 major U.S. cities. This compelled the United States to raise its own preparedness level. Not because an attack was imminent, Russia is not suicidal, but because the risk of miscalculation had reached a threshold where the U.S. could not afford to assume benign intent. When great powers develop weapons that compress reaction time, fear becomes the primary driver in decision-making. Fear of surprise attack, fear of misunderstanding, fear of losing response capability. Fear is the catalyst of escalation, and that catalyst is fully engaged. Now let's consider how this reshapes global dynamics. American officials recognize something crucial. Russia cannot rival the United States economically, technologically, or diplomatically. But Russia doesn't need to match the United States. It only needs to do enough to generate American uncertainty. And this system accomplishes precisely that. It provides Moscow an equalizer. It alters how NATO functions. It changes how U.S. naval forces position themselves. It transforms how policymakers calculate risk. Imagine a future crisis, NATO advancing near Russian territory, or the U.S. reinforcing alliances in Asia. Previously, the United States could act decisively because it considered Russia's strategic options predictable. Not anymore. Now Washington must contemplate, what if Russia activates the system again? What if it threatens a demonstration? What if it repositions the platform closer to operational range? What if it combines this system with cyber operations or space-based disruption? Every action the United States contemplates now carries an element of doubt, and that doubt is rooted in fear. Perhaps the most hazardous aspect of this development is what follows. Inside the Kremlin, the activation of this system wasn't symbolic theater. Russia acted with strategic intent. And because great powers rarely reverse course after revealing a new capability, Moscow now has every motivation to maintain this system's operational status, to demonstrate, to warn, to apply pressure. Inside Washington, policymakers understand they cannot disregard this. The United States will respond. No great power accepts vulnerability without reaction. But any response, even purely defensive measures, will appear threatening to Moscow. And that's how escalation spirals develop. Russia activates a new system. The U.S. reinforces early warning networks. Russia interprets this as preparation for aggression. The U.S. repositions naval assets northward. Russia advances its fleet toward strategic choke points. The U.S. increases reconnaissance. Russia elevates readiness. Step by step, increment by increment, both sides advance toward a confrontation neither desires, but both feel obligated to prepare for. This is the mechanism of great power politics. This is the mechanism that constructed the Cold War. This is the mechanism that nearly destroyed civilization in 1962. This is the mechanism that no nation, not even the United States, can evade. And this is the mechanism Russia has reactivated. Let me be unequivocal. Russia has done something no nation has ever accomplished. Not the United States, not China, not any emerging power. It activated a strategic platform designed to eliminate warning time for the world's most formidable military. That is without precedent. That is perilous. That is historically transformative. And tonight, the United States is restructuring components of its defense architecture because of it. Russia has not achieved superiority, but it has secured something nearly as potent: leverage. Because the United States must now reconsider, must now calculate differently, must now confront a world where strategic assumptions no longer ensure security. The era of automatic American advantage is transforming. And this moment, this activation, this discovery, this alert, marks the beginning of that transformation. Whether the world moves toward restraint or toward escalation depends on decisions being made now in Washington and Moscow, by leaders who must manage fear without permitting it to dictate their actions. That is the responsibility of great powers. That is the peril of revolutionary weapons. And that is the reality confronting the world today. Stay vigilant. This crisis is not concluding. It is advancing into its next phase.